Welcome to For the Love of Books, a podcast by North Lanarkshire Libraries. Hi everyone, welcome back to the North Lanarkshire Libraries podcast For the Love of Books. My name is Chris Wilson, the E-Services Librarian, and happy Book Week Scotland everybody. We're in the midst of Book Week Scotland. We hope you've enjoyed it so far. We have got some fantastic events going on in our libraries this week. And for today's podcast, we have got an author interview for you as well with Philip Caveney, who has also got a bit of an evil twin that he writes under the name of with Danny Weston, which is the books we're going to kind of focus on a little bit with our interview. He's got a new book out called Postcards from Valhalla, and we're going to talk about that book and a little bit about all the ones that he's written as Danny Weston as well. And they're all kind of very apt for this time of year. We've just had Halloween, and most of them are very scary stories, and perfect ones for anyone who enjoys a little scare while they're reading a good book. So if you want to find out a little bit more about Philip's books as Danny Weston, do keep listening and find out all about books such as The Piper and Postcards from Valhalla. Here we go. So, Philip, thank you for coming along and taking part in our podcast today. I thought I would start off by kind of just getting to know why you seem to have a bit of an evil twin called Danny Weston as well. So, because you write under both Philip Caveney and also Danny Weston as well. So, where did the evil twin come from for that?
Well, I think Danny was created, like most of my other characters, for a book called The Piper, which we'll probably talk about later on. But I've been published for a very long time. My first book, believe it or not, was published in 1977. That was my first. Yeah,
I saw that online. Yeah.
So, and I'd published a lot of books as Philip Caveney, and then I decided, even when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I used to love scary stories, and I thought I would write one. So I wrote a book called The Piper.
Yeah.
And when I showed it to my regular publishers, they said, sure, yeah, we love this, but we're slightly worried that your fans are going to freak out when they read it. So I had this brainwave. I said, well, what if I kind of created an evil twin of myself, and I'll give Danny the scarier books and I'll do the lighter ones. Of course, cunning plan. This means that I could now publish 2 books a year instead of 1, because, no writer can publish more than 1 book a year.
Yeah. That was just giving yourself double the work, though, at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll start off with it's Book Week Scotland this week. So as an author living in Scotland, I thought I would find out what you thought of Book Week Scotland and what it means to you and how important it is and stuff. So before we kind of focus on Danny a little bit, I thought we'd find out a little bit what you thought of Book Week Scotland.
Well, I think Book Week Scotland is a wonderful thing. I mean, I've lived in Scotland for about 8 years now. I live right in the heart of Edinburgh. It's a wonderful place for a writer to live. It's full of inspiration, full of myths and legends. Just seep out of the very cobbles. I was actually born in Wales. Believe it or not, but my father was in the Royal Air Force, so we moved somewhere different every 2 years. We were never in any place for long. Now, I've lived now in Scotland for about 8 years. And of course, Book Week Scotland has its own identity. It's very much a Scottish thing. And I believe myself, I feel like a Scottish writer now. I've lived here long enough to really appreciate the place and to know quite a bit about it. And I'm constantly looking for new things set within Scotland that will make a great story.
Yeah, I think for us, from a kind of library point of view, Book Week Scotland is such a fantastic event. It's a great opportunity to get authors involved in the library service in a different way of rather than just having their books on the shelf for readers to read, and it's a great kind of way of just focusing everybody's attention on that kind of reading for pleasure and kind of trying to get that kind of real message of how important that is out there and things like that. So it's a great event for us as well.
I think libraries are really important places. I mean, I wouldn't be a writer now without my school library. I mean, looking back, when I was a teenager, about 13 years old, I read a book by Ray Bradbury in the school library. I went to a really horrible boarding school and I spent a lot of time reading books. It's my way of escaping. Something we Wicked This Way Comes was the book. And I thought then, I was probably about 13 years old, I am going to do this. I am going to be a writer. Now, without the school library, without a library being involved, that would probably never have happened.
Yeah, yeah, but it's nice to hear people kind of talking up the importance of libraries and things like that as well, which is lovely as well. So that's lovely to hear. Now, I think we'll focus a little bit on your books now as well, and particularly your Danny Weston Evil Twin books a little bit as well. You mentioned there the first one that you wrote was The Piper. And that won the Scottish Children's Book Award as well. Which online it's described as a ghost story perfect for Halloween. Now, obviously, we've just kind of had the kind of spooky Halloween series. How would you best describe that novel for anyone that might want to kind of pick it up?
Well, The Piper is a traditional ghost story, and it's all about a mysterious house on Romney Marsh that's haunted by the restless spirit of a Napoleonic soldier. And in my story, it's set in the Second World War, and a couple of young evacuees are sent to stay in that house with fairly terrifying results. It's got all the ingredients of a scary story, an ancient curse, eerie deserted landscapes, a series of unexplained deaths. As you say, perfect reading for Halloween. But I don't know why, but as a teenager myself, I just loved to read scary stories. And, when I first started writing, I would do short stories because you have to work yourself up to taking on a novel. Yeah. And they would nearly always have a fairly terrifying twist in them.
Yeah, and it must be quite exciting to kind of get that award for that first kind of attempt at writing for that audience as well.
It was wonderful. I mean, it's always exciting to win an award, and also just to be nominated for one. Yeah. Because I think there've been various awards down the years, but that was by far the most important one for me. The Scottish Children's Book Prize. That's a beauty to have. I still have it right over there on my mantelpiece at the moment. Actually, the award that I got. Because the rest of the time, I'm just grateful that people are still reading my books. As I said, I've published over 50 now. It's been quite a long career for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And my whole sort of raison d'etre, I suppose, is to try and do something different every time. We're often told, what you should do is get a good idea and then just do variations on that, parts 1 to 25. And I can't think of anything more boring for me personally. I wouldn't want to do that. I always want to try and find a different angle.
Yeah, and like you say, that novel's not the only one you've kind of received sort of a bit of kind of recognition from awards with as well. You were nominated for the Carnegie Medal as well, is that right?
That's right. That was The Haunting of Jessup Rise, another classic ghost story. That one actually set in Wales, the land of my birth, which I've hardly ever visited, which is kind of weird. But it was also shortlisted for the Scottish Teenage Book Prize, that one. It was 2018, and we came so close. I think we were just pipped at the post. But as I said, you can't win them all. And, writing... obviously it's wonderful when you get prizes. It's great. It makes you feel that it's all been worthwhile. But the main thing, and it's always been the main thing, is to reach readers and to sort of hopefully reach out to them and surprise them and thrill them and sometimes even scare them. And that's always been what's behind my desire to become a writer.
Yeah, and I suppose that's like I say, I mean, obviously that it is good to kind of get that recognition of an award, but I suppose that the kind of building that kind of readership and following for your readers for your novels must be kind of the kind of key part of being a writer, I would imagine. Yeah, but we'll move on a little bit to your new book that's just came out, and it is called Postcards from Valhalla, and it continues along the lines of the scary stories that you've been getting in the past, but it's got a little bit of a Viking twist to this one, hasn't it? So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that new novel?
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea of the story came from I wanted to do something about Norse mythology. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's something I'm not that a big aficionado of it, but it's always thought, there are some great classic stories in there. I'd like to do something. I want to give it a modern setting, and I want there to be characters within the book that are inspired by Nordic myth, but are perhaps, on the face of it, ordinary people, except there's something about them that's not quite right, and something there that gives you pause to think, well, there's something very strange about them. Now, the core of this story is about a 15-year-old boy called Viggo.
Yeah.
And with his mother, he goes in search of his older brother, Magnus, who's gone missing in Shetland. Now, the fact that Viggo's father went missing in the same location 5 years earlier is obviously very, very worrying. And the mother is terrified. What's happening to my older son? We've got to go and find him. Now, Viggo is doesn't get on that well with his older brother. He always feels that he's lived in his older brother's shadow for a long time. And Viggo is a sort of a Dungeons and Dragons kid. His only connection to Norse stuff is that he likes the Thor movies, and was looking forward to seeing the new one at the local Cineworld, and then finds that he's being dragged off to Shetland, a place he's never even been or thought about, for this brother who he doesn't really want to meet again. So that's the basis of it.
Yeah, and he kind of starts to have some sort of visions and things like that as he goes along the story, doesn't he?
That's right.
The first one he kind of encounters is when he's kind of driving. They're driving to get to the ferry, and he sees one coming towards the car, and he kind of freaks out because he thinks it's a real horse coming towards the car, and he doesn't understand why his mum's not swerving out the way and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite vivid for him to see these kind of visions that he sees.
As the story progresses, you see he has these dreams and visions and things, and the closer he gets to Shetland, the more intense and the more frightening they become. This book is actually obsessed with dreaming. I think that's the key to the story. It's all about dreams. And what I try to do in this story is to blur the lines between dreams and reality. So as the book progresses, we're not sure if what we're seeing is a dream or if it's actually happening.
I see. And where did the inspiration for the story come from? Is there anything that in particular that sparks the stories that you end up writing, or was there kind of any particular thing that made you kind of want to write a sort of Viking-based story?
Well, as I say, it was no more than that, because I'm not a big expert on that kind of thing, on Norse mythology, but I had the idea of doing something connected to it. And when you've been writing for a very long time, it's a bit like being addicted. I mean, you wake up and you think, I finished a book, what am I going to do next? So you seize upon an idea and you start looking around it. And then I seized on the idea of doing something about Shetland. Shetland was a place I had never been, but was fascinating place. So I and my wife, we drove up to Shetland, and we spent a week driving from the south right up to the northernmost point in Unst. And then I decided that as we were going along, I thought what I would do is my characters would follow my journey. They would follow in my footsteps. They would see what I saw.
Okay.
The other thing that occurred to me was, look, we are filming video footage as we go, mostly for reference purposes. Wouldn't it be great if my readers, if there were QR codes planted in the book, and they could take their phone and look at the QR code and be taken to that exact place in Shetland and see what I'm seeing and what my characters are seeing, and then they would feel that they were in that place. So really, it's like the bonus features on a DVD, that you want to look at them, and they will show you sort of 3 locations in Shetland. There are some other surprising bits and pieces in there as well.
That's fantastic. It's a really good use of kind of modern technology to kind of add to the story a little bit as well, isn't it? It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's something I've never done before, and I just suddenly thought, well, why not? We're used to seeing those things on a DVD or whatever, or a film. And why not? Why couldn't that be in a book? And it's just there if you want it. You don't have to look at it, but it's there.
Yeah, it's just one of those kind of like, it adds a little bit, but it doesn't. You don't need it for the story, the main kind of story, but it kind of just adds a little bit extra to it, which I think it's a fantastic idea. I really like that, and probably something that a lot more kind of writers should kind of look at doing, and kind of add a little bit to their stories themselves. That's a great idea. I love it. I'd imagine you're not a kind of sort of Viking expert, so I would imagine there must have been kind of a little bit of kind of research you've had to done. Obviously, you mentioned you've kind of done your kind of little kind of journey up to Shetland and things, but there must have been kind of a wee bit of research to make sure you got that kind of authentic kind of Viking references and things like that. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as I say, I didn't want to make it this kind of Thor, Loki, sort of lots of characters running around in spandex like some sort of a Marvel movie. I wanted it to feel very real, very realistic. And yet, if you look, there are connections between these characters and some of the stories from Norse mythology. And some of the things are mentioned in passing, and there is a character called Leon who Viggo and his mother meet on the ferry going over, and who somehow attaches himself to them. And then they can't get rid of him. He follows them everywhere. He always keeps turning up. And this man seems to know about any subject in the world, down to the finest detail. He is like a walking Wikipedia. And the more he's with them, the more they become dependent upon him. And by the end of it, you're not sure about this guy. You think, is he good? Is he bad? There's something about him that is really, really off the scale. So, I mean, my feeling about it is, obviously, if young readers have a look at this book and think, oh, I'd like to know more about this, and then they go and look at Norse mythology, that's so much the better. That's great, but it's not necessary. I don't think there's anything in this story that they won't get fairly easily just from a read.
Yeah, so I was going to ask that about whether do you think that the readers need to be kind of into Vikings as to kind of enjoy this story, but or can they kind of get into it without having that sort of Viking interest?
I don't think there's any need for you to even be. I mean, the weird thing was, I went to Shetland, and I don't know if you've ever been. It's an amazing place, and you're struck by stuff the moment you arrive. I mean, driving across the landscape, you look around, you think, well, there's something wrong here. What's going on? Where are the trees? And it turns out there are no trees on Shetland. That 5,000 years ago, the Vikings, who wanted to raise their sheep, cut them all down. And because all these thousands and thousands of sheep never let anything grow back, so there are no trees at all. And that's weird, because I've visited lots of Scottish islands, and mostly there are trees there. So all this kind of thing is remarked upon. I'm also hoping, that it will get a lot of people to go and visit Shetland, because it's a fantastic place. The people there were so friendly, so welcoming. And I just think it's one of the most unique places I've ever visited.
That's fantastic. I haven't ever been to Shetland, but it's somewhere that I would love to see at one point. And it does, and I didn't know that about, actually. That's a fantastic little kind of fact about the trees and things like that. I didn't know that about that, so that's really interesting. And I think it is one of those places that's just got that kind of sort of mystery to it that I think everyone would kind of love to kind of discover a little bit more. And it's got that really rich history behind it, and it's a really interesting place, and it's probably a great setting for a book to kind of be set in. So hopefully the readers who get a chance to read that will kind of be able to kind of get involved in the mystery of Shetland a little bit as well. So obviously you have kind of created this sort of Danny Weston evil twin kind of persona, and written various very scary books under that pen name. Should we be a little bit worried about how much you take enjoyment out of scaring teenagers, or is it just that, do you think it's just it's a nice show enough to write for the teenage audience?
Well, I don't think there's anything to be scared. I mean, in a weird way, I mean, from our very earliest years, think of the very first stories that we are given as children, Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel. They are essentially gothic horror stories. Yeah. And we're thinking of giving that to tiny children who can barely walk and talk. So we're kind of raising it. And I mean, I know as a kid, the stories that I really responded to were the scary ones. I used to love. I mean, there used to be the pan books of horror stories that you could get as a kid. And I read all of those. I had the whole series, and I loved the idea of having some sort of short, sharp story that get in there and will twist you and will really freak you out. And if I'm in a school and I say, who likes scary stories here, I can guarantee hundreds of hands will go up.
Yeah.
I'm scared. But it's also quite difficult to scare people with just words on paper as well. It's a real skill, a challenge. Right.
It is a challenge, and I think you're right though. I think kind of in sort of younger age, the scary stories that you hear and are the ones that kind of stick with you a little bit, isn't it? Yes. I know it's not a book, but I remember a family member let me see a scary movie at a very young age, which was probably not something they should have done. But let me see, and it was one of those things that stuck with me, and it made me terrified of werewolves ever since. And I even remember like, vividly to this day, I had a nightmare about werewolves and stuff like that whenever I was young after that, and it's sort of something that kind of just sparks a kind of really kind of and makes it kind of almost like a core memory in your mind about these things. It does stick with you a little bit, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, in the run up to Halloween, the Duke of Edinburgh volunteers at Cumbernauld Library named your book, one of your other books, Mr. Sparks, as their book of the week on our T-Space social media. And any teens that haven't followed the T-Space accounts should go and follow them and keep up with all the updates that are going on to those. The cover alone in that book, I think, is scary enough for me. The kind of ventriloquist doll kind of thing that's on the cover. That's quite a scary cover for me, don't you think?
This is one of the scariest covers I think I've ever had. I mean, I loved that cover actually, and I had it as my home screen on my phone for ages. Until it was recently replaced, I think by Inch Tim, because I love the artwork for that as well. That's another Danny Weston book, but I don't know. It's great because getting the right cover is so important.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky, I guess, in that respect, that I do get some input into it. I mean, basically, I think the publishers will say to me, "Have you got any ideas for the basic idea for a cover?" I mean, and I'll just say, I mean, for the new book, I sort of said, well, there's a tree, the tree of Yggdrasil, which is this famous tree from Norse mythology, and it figures in the story. I think that might be the place to start, and sure enough, we've ended up with a cover which I'm really pleased with, that does have this kind of tree as the central design, central image. It's great that I actually did train as a graphic designer back in the day when I was at college.
Oh, right.
But I had my first book published around the same time, and I never ever got to use that skill. So I'd be so rusty now, but I do still like to look at and comment on the artwork and everything, and maybe make a suggestion, say, well, how about if we went for a bright orange for these letters or something, you know? And they're very good. They're very accommodating. I like that. I like being involved.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was going to ask you about whether you had much input into the cover design, because I have sort of spoke to various authors, and I kind of do tend to kind of ask that a little bit to a lot of them, because I like artwork a lot on the books, and I think a lot of it kind of effort and goes into a lot of the artwork that goes on them, and it's interesting to see because some authors don't really kind of either want to get involved too much with that side of things or have too much of a say, but it's interesting that you've kind of got that kind of relationship with the publisher where they do allow you to kind of quite a significant input into it and kind of comment on it and things.
Yeah. The one place you don't get any input, of course, is with translations. And for instance, back in the day, my first children's series, Sebastian Dark, which I mentioned about 4 books, and that was sold in 20 countries around the world. And we had some covers from weird places like, I don't know, Indonesia and places like that, Spain, Japan, and these book covers would come in and they bore no resemblance to the story that I thought, who are these characters? You're given the book after the event. Oh, this is what it looks like in Thailand, for instance, or whatever, and you think, interpret your ideas visually.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I've never ever thought about that, but it's interesting to think about how kind of maybe different cultures maybe affect how the cover turns out and things like that sort of stuff. It's interesting. Yeah, it's something I've never really ever thought about before, and it's interesting that you kind of get to have a wee bit of an input to there, but not so much for an international audience. I suppose it maybe be published by different people and things like that in different countries and things. So. That's maybe kind of part of the reason why. Now, I wanted to ask you about if you had to choose one of your Danny Weston books as a starting point for a new Danny Weston fan, which one would you choose as a kind of start off point for them?
Well, probably just start with the first Danny Weston book, which is The Piper, and I think it came out 2016. I think that came out, but I mean, it's still around, still available. And if you want to sort of pin down the Danny Weston style, that book will pretty much show it to you. But as I say, all those books are different. You can say, okay, well, you know, there are ghost stories, but there's always something different about the ghost story, and it's not quite like the one before. So yeah, I've always been of the mind that I want to be versatile. As Oscar Wilde famously said, that versatility is a curse. But for me, I mean, to keep going for as long as I have, I need to continually reinvent what I do.
Yeah.
And doing a series, you know, until you're up to part 28 or 29, I think, no, why would I do that? Why would I put myself through it? I might be financially more successful, but it's not what motivates me as a writer.
Yeah, I think I do often think about that, but with like, the kind of people who do have those series that are like 25 books long, how they can kind of keep those characters and keep it kind of fresh. It must be quite challenging to do that. Whereas, like kind of
I think I've got longer than 3 or 4 books in before I start to think, oh, you know, I'm starting to think I'd like to sort of move on to something else now. So these days, and for a long time now, I have done standalones, because I love the fact that you get in there, you get your idea, you make your story, and then it's gone, and then you're on to something else. And you know, weirdly, by the time a book comes out, I mean, I have a copy of Postcards from Valhalla here. I only arrived yesterday, but I'm already sort of well into the thing that comes next.
So I was going to actually ask you that as a kind of as we're kind of getting to the end of the podcast about what does come next for you. So you've got something else in the pipeline already. That I was wondering about whether there would be a possibility of any sequels for like Postcards from Valhalla, but you're not looking into that too much. So is it a new?
I mean, I might be persuaded if it did incredibly well, and I might. But I know for the moment I'm already halfway into a new idea.
Fantastic.
Just roughly, and this is the first place that it's ever been said. I'll tell you this. I'm writing about a boy who gets trapped in a famous book.
Oh.
By a famous Victorian writer, and that's all I'm going to say, because at the moment it's just I'm kicking the idea around, but it's flowing really nicely, and I'm already up about the halfway point thinking this could be a goer. So, you know, again, it's always that, it's a bit like that thing about being the shark, always wanting to keep on moving forward. You know, you can't let the grass grow. You write the end, you send it off to somebody, you do the edits and all that kind of stuff. Oh, there's a whole lot of stuff that comes afterwards. You have to do edits and various things and proofings, but then I'm already on to the next idea and thinking, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? You know, it's almost like I can't stop myself from doing it.
Yeah, that sounds fun. That kind of idea you've got sounds fantastic. I have to admit that sounds like a great idea, and hopefully it comes to kind of a full novel at some point, and we can kind of get a chance to read that when it sounds fantastic.
It's well on the way to being that, so you know, watch this space.
And it's a little exclusive for us on our podcast, which is always a great thing. So thank you very much, Philip, for coming along and telling us all about your Danny Weston books. And I'm sure there'll be lots of readers out there who'll be really interested to get their hands on them, either teens or even adults, because I'm sure adults would get just as much out of them as well if you like a good scary story. And you can kind of find most all the books on our online catalogue as well to kind of reserve and things like that if you are interested in catching some of them. So thanks for coming along and talking to us about them, Philip.
Thank you, and it's lovely to talk to you.
So there you go, guys. I hope you've enjoyed listening to our little chat with Philip and finding out a little bit about his evil twin alter ego, Danny Weston. If you do fancy picking out some of these books, do check our online catalogue and see if you can reserve them and enjoy a good scare, which is always good. That's all for us for now, guys. There is always lots of some fun stuff happening in the libraries. Do check out our website to see what's going on and have a wee look at there. So go to cultureradio.co.uk/libraries and you'll find out all the stuff that's going on in libraries on there. But that's all for now, guys. Do watch out for the next Bees Books edition of the podcast coming out next week as well. It's going to be another fantastic episode from Jenny and Paddy. And you can leave us some feedback on our podcast using hashtag FLB podcast or by dropping us a wee email at librarypodcast@northland.co.uk. And we can get a wee email from that. So I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we'll be back again very, very soon with another podcast. Bye, guys.